Welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we are talking about the NAL. Finally, we are doing the power ranking going into the stage. So last stage I did power ranking sort of throughout, and I probably won't do that this stage. It just isn't terribly interesting unless you do them really spread out because there's not that much change. And then because we're playing best of ones and just all these factors, it's just not super interesting. So I'll probably just be doing this one, and then maybe I'll do one like partway through the stage to see where things have changed compared to this. But we'll see. And probably also tomorrow doing predictions, and NAL actually starts up tomorrow, so I guess I'll try to have that out before the games actually begin. As I'm recording this, they are playing in EU, and actually let me see this go. Oh yeah, somebody's getting smoked by somebody else, and you may or may not know who that is, but okay, so let's actually talk about this. And if you're not aware of the format, and actually, well, let me really quickly change this, otherwise TSM is going to get lost in the mix when I put them up here. Let's make this gray. Okay, yeah, so tier list format, and the tiers aren't especially important. It's mostly just going to be fully ordered. I'll just put like 2 teams probably in every tier, and I could just have 10 and 1 team in each tier, but this is easier to fit on the screen and to look at and whatnot. So here I have all of the teams arranged in the order in which they placed last stage. So these 4 teams are the ones that went to the major, and then Dark Zero, Parabellum, pretty narrowly missing out on the major. And do keep in mind for last stage, even though the things ended up in a certain way, the stage was so incredibly close. Astralis on 16 points, and I guess Sonics and Oxygen also on 16 points. TSM and Space Station on 12 points. So everyone except for Mirage was between 12 and 16 points. Mirage ended up on 6, and it seems extremely difficult for this upcoming stage to be that close in terms of the points. But I guess it's possible, and it'd be cool to see. And I mean, maybe even Mirage gets in there, takes a few points from other teams. But okay, so just for reference, yeah, this is the order that they did place last stage, and yeah, let's just get into it. We're going to start at the bottom. So Beast Coast first up, one of the teams to make 2 roster changes, and I mean, it remains to be seen which team's roster changes will actually end up being the best. I think just at a glance, it seems like Sonic's roster changes are pretty good. Probably Mirage will hopefully do good for them. And then some of them are a little bit weirder. I think people aren't a big fan of the TSM changes. Yeti joining Space Station is, we'll see how it pans out. And then Beast Coast and Parabellum, I guess, seem like maybe lateral moves in some case. So Beast Coast, Drip, and Sweater departing the roster, and then they're bringing in Xeno and Ferda. So they don't seem like terrible pickups, and they don't seem like spectacular pickups either. Maybe they will light the world on fire, but the reason they're all the way here at the bottom, even below Mirage, who have been terrible, is because, well, Mirage made some pretty sweeping changes, some pretty big pickups, seemingly, but it sounds like Ferda's not going to be able to play for some amount of time due to visa issues. So not only do they have to adapt to 2 new players, so I mean, changing up 2/5 of your team, it's pretty significant, but for the first however many games, it seems like Ferda's not even going to be in, so they're not going to even be able to get game day experience with the 5-man roster. And so for all these reasons, I'm going to have Beast Coast at the bottom. It's possible that they actually do quite well, and maybe Ferda will have his visa issues sorted out, but from everything that we are aware of, I'm going to have Beast Coast at the bottom here. I don't think this is a very unpopular opinion. Okay, next up is Mirage. Yeah, it's difficult to put them much higher, even though, yeah, they've changed up the team a little bit. They retained Benji, Melted, and Kento, and also Kento. He didn't do spectacularly, but of course he was playing on Mirage, only played the 1 stage. We'll have to see what he does going forward. Melted has been pretty bad statistically in the first 2 stages, but I certainly think he has the capacity as a player to do better. Well, if he does really bad this stage, it might be kind of brutal for him going forward. Maybe he won't survive the next transfer window, but I'd like to see and expect that it is possible to see a good stage from him going forward. And then Benji, he's had good stages in the past. Maybe he hasn't been spectacular lately. And I think he had a pretty good stage last stage, though. So I definitely think he's a player that can do well in the correct environment. Maybe this will be that correct environment, so we'll have to see. Nick's going over to the coaching staff might help them out quite a lot. And I don't know how exactly he's involved. I don't know if it's just like a superficial title or if he'll actually be doing a lot of work. He was a guest analyst, temp analyst, or whatever you want to call it, for Dark Zero when they won the Charlotte Major. So I mean, it remains to be seen how significant his impact was on them at that major and his contributions to them winning the major. But I mean, you got to give him some amount of credit. He came in to be that temp analyst, and then they did win the major. So causation, correlation, I don't know. We'll have to see. But maybe it will help them out, him being on that side of things. And then they did get rid of Marmalade, of course, picking up Mohesi and and Dexter, which I think are two very promising pickups. And Marmalade, I mean, I think it's unfortunate to be a support player on a bad team, and especially last stage, because going into this stage, a lot of support players were dropped. Super, I guess he planned to depart the playing roster anyways, but he got dropped, and then Marmalade, and then even if you look at some other regions, that sort of happened. And okay, so that's just where the meta is going, and maybe a victim of that a little bit. But yeah, Mohesi and Dexter, I think I expect one or both of them to do quite well, and if Mirage does well, to be a big part of that. So we'll see. I don't know if Mirage can really make top 4. It's probably not super realistic, but it is possible. We are just playing best of 1, so just get a few sneaky wins in there and a few maybe just other wins, of course, as well, but it's possible. Okay, so we'll move on from Mirage, and we're gonna go to TSM next, and of course, the reigning world champions, I guess 3 of them now, because they did make 2 roster changes, dropping Geo, dropping Chala. Maybe they didn't completely want to drop Geo. I was just having a conversation with somebody in the comments earlier about this, and I mean, would Geo have left if he didn't have an offer from Sonics? Were TSM going to get rid of him anyways? I don't know for sure, but maybe not. He did play at Gamers 8. They were only trialing 1 player, and then well, now they have 2 new players. They have Gasher on the roster as well. And yeah, so as far as the roster changes go, I think a lot of people just are not big fans of Gasher, and well, he has a lot to prove. I think Snake is expected to do fairly well, but there's also been talk, and I hate to keep reiterating this, especially if it's not true, but people have said that he's just not the best teammate or the best person to be around all the time. Like, he has sort of attitude issues, and well, I guess that wasn't so much reflected in his stat line in Challenger League, but of course it is Challenger League. We're playing in the big leagues now, so if he can get that under control but maintain his level of play from Challenger League, and even at Gamers 8, even though he did only play the 1 match and then he got sick, so he couldn't continue to play, he did quite well in the 1 match he did play. So TSM, yeah, because the roster changes are a little bit dubious, and then they've also been really bad the last 2 stages, getting 9th place, getting 8th place. I got to put them down here until they can actually prove that they can make it back to the top. And it's still world champions on the team, still solid players. Maybe Achieved's been a little bit shaky, Bolo as well. But if they can get back into form, if Mark can stay good, if the other 2 players prove to be good pickups, then maybe TSM can break into the top 4. But the top of NA is so competitive, we're just going to have to see. And next up, it could probably be either of these 2. I'm going to put Parabellum, so another team that maybe potentially made a lateral move. So in the case of Beast Coast, if you thought Drip was bad and Sweater was good, which I mean, some people might think exactly that, and then if you think Xeno and Ferda are both like somewhere in between, maybe it averages out to be the same. And in the case of Parabellum, Doc and Asian coming in, perhaps you think Penguin was bad and Gunner was good, and that just breaks things down in a really simple way. And some people might think that, but of course, that's just a really basic way of thinking. If you just look at the stats, of course, Penguin was sort of a support player and Gunner was a fragger, so of course, the stats are reflected that way. But Gunner, extremely good at the very least, right? Came in for his rookie stage and was one of the best players in the league. So if nothing else, I mean, you're getting rid of a good player, and well, I mean, they probably didn't want to get rid of him. They didn't have much of a choice. Sonics sort of snatched him up. But even if you think the 2 new players on the same level of Penguin, as long as they're below Gunner, then that means that you're bringing in a lower average player. But okay, Asian, a player with a lot of hype around him when he finally made it to Challenger League, when he finally came of age, and then he wasn't bad, but he wasn't like maybe as good as people expected. Maybe the expectations were too high. And then Doc, also a pretty good performer in Challenger League. So we'll see how this team works out. I mean, another team that sort of dropped a support player, but they do have another one still. Probably one of the better support players in the league, seemingly, in Kool-Aid. So maybe the team will be pretty well defined, and maybe they will come out of the gates hot. But because they didn't do especially well before. They have like a 7th and a 6th place finish, and it's not clear that these changes will take them to the top. I still think it's possible, but they're going to have to really earn their place at the top, again, because of how competitive the top teams are at the moment. And then Space Station, maybe they deserve to be lower. They did get 9th place last stage, and pretty narrowly so. Of course, if they won one more game, they could have made the major. Just like that's the case for pretty much every team in the league that didn't make the major. Just one more game would have been enough to put them into making the major. And some of them, it might have had to be a particular game, but even in the last day, like a bunch of teams could have qualified. So yeah, Space Station barely missed the major stage 1, missed it by, again, in terms of placements, by quite a lot, but in terms of points, not that much. And a very strong team. Maybe the meta changes will favor them. Maybe we get to see Fultz back onto the Zofia, and maybe they'll figure out the roles a little bit here. Bosco on the hard breach, Yeti on the flank watch lurk type thing, hot and cold on maybe sort of flex, and then you put Rampy and Fultz back on the entry. Maybe it'll work out, but probably more of their players need to be firing at the same time. I think Rampy had a pretty good stage last stage, but their players can't seem to all perform at the same time lately. Hot and cold, not as good as he was last year. Bosco, well, a little bit hot and cold here and there, but again, the support player, it is what it is. But, you need probably Fultz, and you probably need 3 of your players at any given time to be doing quite well at the moment. You can't just get hard carried by one player anymore. It's just too competitive. Every once in a while, though, there will be a game where that does happen. But overall, throughout the course of the stage, it needs to be a team effort. I'm going to have Space Station down here. Maybe this is overrating them a little bit, but especially coming into things early, all 4 of these teams did make 2 roster changes. Space Station only making 1 roster change, so maybe they can adapt to the change more quickly, and maybe that'll help them out at the beginning. We'll have to see. I think they do have a pretty tough first week, but we'll talk about that later. So that leaves the sort of top 5. These are the 5 teams from NA that have gone to majors thus far, and we've seen Astralis, Oxygen, and Xset go to both of them, and then Sonics went to the more recent one. Dark Zero went to the previous one, of course, winning that one. And which team is going to be next up here? So it's sort of tough to call. I think I'm going to have, and this does actually mean that the top 4 from last stage are going to be the top 4 again here. And I mean, it makes sense. It is a power ranking, and that's the most recent thing that we have to go off of in terms of regional play. And I'll take into account the major performances somewhat, but because there seemed to be such a difference for a lot of teams in terms of how they play internationally versus how they play within the region, I'm going to favor the regional play a little bit more. So Dark Zero, they've just sort of been like middle tier in terms of regional play for like the longest time. Last year, or I guess in the 5 stages of like the modern NAL, they got 6th place, 4th place, 4th place, 3rd place, 5th place. So good enough to go to 3 of the 4 majors, and because they're 6th place in stage 1 of last year, there was no major that corresponded to that, so they didn't get punished there. In stage 2, they went 7-1, but they had 6 overtime wins, so that punished them, put them in 4th place, still got to go to the major, whatever. And then 5th place in the last stage means they missed out on the major, but again, we've never seen them place top 2. They've literally always been between 3rd and 6th place, so I'm gonna have them down here. This is probably about their average 4th or 5th place. And no roster changes coming in. Maybe roster changes will be important for some of the teams to move up, but maybe they will stagnate. We'll have to see. They did miss out pretty narrowly on the major last stage, but again, that was true for a lot of teams. So I'm gonna have them down here. I think this is like a fairish placement. Maybe move them up 1. But okay, who do I want to put next? Now it becomes extremely tough to call. I think I'm gonna have Sonics here. I think on paper, they could be the best team in the league in terms of having good players, having the proper roles filled, all of these things. We'll have to actually see. But with 2 roster changes coming in, it's not and a very drastic change in Super no longer being on the playing roster. Of course, the most important piece of their team, you might argue, you might say Grixer's the best player on the team, but Super was on that roster forever, and he built the team. He made things happen on that team. Okay, not on the roster anymore. And there is a reason he decided to retire now. He was confident that the players coming in to fill his, and I suppose also Yeti spots, could do it adequately, and probably more than adequately. But again, having 2 roster changes going up against some of these other teams that have been very consistent, it seems like maybe the other teams might have a little bit of a leg up, but there has to be some team lower than the other ones, and I don't think it's terribly significant here. They did manage to squeak into that 2nd place spot, but I guess they could have easily secured first had they not choked their game versus Mirage or just any other game. But okay, I'm gonna have them down here for now. I think it's entirely possible they win the league, but I think it's also possible maybe they don't make top 4 if they can't figure out their team situation immediately. Okay, and not to say that they already haven't, we just haven't seen them play yet. So that leaves the top 3, and yeah, you probably call these the top 3 so far. It is the 3 teams that have gone to both majors, simple as that. And I guess you'd say these 2 teams have higher highs than Xset, both regionally and internationally. Astralis 1st place, both stages. Oxygen, 2nd and then 3rd place, and Astralis 2nd place in Charlotte, Oxygen 3rd, 4th place in Charlotte, and Xset got No, I guess the same as Oxygen in Berlin. They made it to the semifinals as well. So the same highs, and Xset being more consistent than Oxygen internationally, but less consistent regionally. And then second and third place versus fourth place. I guess technically that makes Xset more consistent, but second, third, that's not very inconsistent. And both of them are obviously higher than fourth place. I think. Also take into account Astralis, Xset, neither of them made roster changes. Oxygen bringing in a new player. I'm going to have Oxygen down here, and again, I'm maybe punishing a team a little bit for making a roster change because you do have to adapt to it. But okay, this is another conversation I had in the comments a little while ago. They are replacing Sweater, or they're bringing in Sweater to replace Laxing, and that's not exactly a one-for-one role change. Laxing sort of played unique roles that are, well, seemingly evaporating a little bit these days. Flank Watch maybe going away a little bit. People think it's not a real role, quote-unquote, but, however you want to call it. Sweater coming in as a flex, and that's kind of, sort of what Laxing did. You could maybe call him flex, but that's not exactly true, right? So the roles are a little bit weird, and also keep in mind, the last several times Oxygen has made roster changes, they were extremely successful. When they brought in Kino and Yaga, when they brought in Newers and Dream, and then even before that, they were able to slot players into their structure pretty well. But Laxing was always a big part of that. Vertical, Laxing, and Foxay were the consistent core that new players were brought in to support. They are now changing a player from that core. So it could be a little bit different here. Sweater, a very good player. Laxing was also a very good player. Maybe they just thought Sweater was a meta call. I mean, whatever you want to call it. But with things being a little bit weird, and also because they sort of faltered at the last event, I'm going to put him here. But speaking of faltering at the last event, Astralis and Xset. So is this the order I want to go with? I'm sort of inclined to say yes, and of course it is a bit strange to put the, Astralis got first place both stages. Xset got fourth place both stages, so they both went to both majors. Astralis, much better, better performance in Charlotte. They were the ones that knocked Xset out. Xset going out in the quarterfinals there, and Astralis making it all the way to the grand final, but Astralis got kind of smoked in groups. They looked weirdly bad, so maybe that does signal them being figured out. Maybe, I think it has a lot to do with them having to play against other regions, which they didn't have to do as much in Charlotte. And Xset just seems well positioned, well built to handle anything thrown at them, and they don't always come out on top, but they win a lot more than they lose. They're pretty consistent. I'm going to put Xset on top, and also keep in mind, they are still a newish team. Of course, they now have two stages under their belts as a 5-man stack, and also 2 majors under their belts. And same sort of thing for Astralis, still a sort of fresh team in that they brought in Forest and Call Out fairly recently, and that did change up the team a good amount. But of course, Xset just sort of built as a new 5-man. Some of the players that played together, especially most notably Kino and Yaga on Oxygen, so there was a little bit of pre-built synergy there, but again, as a pretty fresh team, it's a little bit different than the case for Astralis. And maybe this isn't correct to do. That's just sort of what I'm inclined to do. I'm going to put Xset at the top, and I do think some people have been calling their shot, saying that this will be a little bit of a fall-off stage for Astralis, and I mean, they are on a bit of a downward trajectory. Yes, they did get first place in both stages, but they went from 20 whatever points being extremely dominant in NA in stage 1, only losing 1 game, to just barely making first place. And there were some oddities last stage with some players having COVID, having to play online, having to play with subs, all this stuff, and hopefully that stuff doesn't happen this stage. But with their downward trajectory and their poor performance at the Berlin Major, I think I'm going to put Xset on top. They are just that consistent, and yeah, maybe they aren't they're on somewhat of an upward trajectory, similar performances in stage 1 and 2, and then going from the quarterfinals in Charlotte to the semifinals in Berlin. I'm going to put them at top. I'm going to give them that credit. I think they deserve it. They've been very consistent, very good, and they're very lethal, seemingly very well built to the meta, which some of the other teams are, maybe especially you might say Oxygen and Sonics, their roster changes are geared towards adapting towards the meta, but I think Xset and Astralis got a little bit of an early start in that regard. So this is what I'm going to go with. From top to bottom, Xset, Astralis, Oxygen, Sonics, Dark Zero, Space Station, Parabellum, TSM, Mirage, and Beast Coast. And so, I mean, this isn't technically my predictions for the results. If I was, I don't know. I mean, if I was actually going to predict, I think Astralis, well, they do have the track record to get first place, but I guess this is about my best guess, and it seems like these are the 4 strongest teams going forward, but of course, these are the 5 strongest teams going forward, I would say, and we'll see if the roster changes for any of these 5 teams is enough to push them up here to knock out one of the other teams from a major spot. And yeah, I mean, I guess eyes on these teams, because significant changes for all of them. along with significant changes for, you know, especially Sonics with 2 players being subbed out, 1 player for Auction, 1 player for Space Station. So much stuff going on this stage, and so it should be pretty exciting. And so again, I guess predictions coming out tomorrow. And so if you have any questions, comments, what do I usually say? Questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, corrections, leave them below. I'd love to have a conversation, and like and a subscription would be appreciated. I'll catch you guys in the next video.